Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Undergraduate ACTC Conference. I am Charlie Thomas. I'm the Executive Director of ACTC and Professor of Philosophy at Mercer University. I am so glad you guys are here. As ACTC sort of found itself in the midst of the pandemic, like everyone else, one of my questions, and it's been not just for ACTC, but in general, one of my questions has been so much of what we want to do and what we love to do, we can't do, or it's diminished in some way. We've had to alter it and make concessions to the pandemic. But are there any things that we can do that actually are possible or easier because of the situation we're in? And ACTC has long had international connections at the faculty level, and we've long done undergraduate conferences, but we've never been able to do an international undergraduate conference for obvious reasons. And so I'm extraordinarily pleased that we were able to put this together so that people all over North America, Canada, and several people from Europe have been able to join us for this. So thank you for being here. Thank you for writing your papers or agreeing to moderate a session. Very, 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 very happy that you're here. I am going to go ahead and introduce Professor Michael Crom, and then I love the idea of everyone else doing some brief introductions too, but I'll let him sort of manage how he wants to order this session. So my co-organizer of this event is Professor Michael Crom, who is the director of Benedict Leadership Studies at St. Vincent. Is it St. Vincent College or St. Vincent University, Mike? St. Vincent College, yeah, in Pennsylvania. And just I'll say this now, and I hope I'll remind you regularly that next year our conference will be live, face-to-face, and it will be at St. Vincent College. Our undergraduate conference will be at St. Vincent College. So those of you who are at a place in your academic career where you might be interested in presenting another paper next year, we hope that you'll consider coming to Pennsylvania and giving us a chance to meet you face to face. That would be wonderful. But for now, the co-organizer of this conference and our opening plenary speaker, it's really my pleasure to introduce him to you, Professor Michael Crom.
All right, thank you, Professor Thomas, and thanks everyone. It's good to get together, and again, just the fact that we can get together in some sense. Dr. Thomas and I are both philosophers, so we could have discussions if you'd like about if we're actually here together, or are we welcoming you? Is that really possible online? That sort of thing. But we'll forgo that for now. I'm going to jump into to talk about Petrarch, and we're going to read a little together. Then I'm going to read my paper, and then there'll be time for discussion, and then we'll talk about some logistics and look at this whole schedule. So while it would be great for everyone to introduce themselves, I think maybe what we'll do is I'll be calling on some people or asking for volunteers, and people can introduce themselves when they do that, and we'll get as many in as we can. So first, I'm going to take us on a little virtual journey to get us a little bit situated here. So here is a portrait of Petrarch. He's someone who's not often covered in even great books type curricula or classic liberal arts curricula. And it's too bad. He really does have a lot to offer, especially, I think probably more, if you're a poet, you should certainly look Petrarch's direction. But we're going to be focusing on just one thing that he wrote. And it's a letter. So let's do a virtual journey here to Mont Ventoux. And I can't see anybody right now because of the share screen, but I wonder if any of you have been to Mont Ventoux. I went there, actually, my wife and I took our honeymoon in France in Montpellier. We spent the summer basically in Montpellier and went one time there. I didn't know the significance of Mont Ventoux, and It's not necessarily that impressive as a mountain, but it's right outside of Avignon, and the popes were in Avignon at that time in the 1300s when he went on this little adventure. And if you're a Tour de France fan, it's actually often featured in the Tour de France. There was a really tragic death years and years ago of a British writer who, I think his last words were, "Get me back on my bloody bike." And he died on Mont Ventoux, a sacrifice for his sport. So as we're going to read, Petrarch, who's based out of Avignon, climbed Mont Ventoux. So here it is. It's not snow on the top. It's nothing grows on the top. I think it was deforested at one point. And I have a photo here. Here's a photo of it. You can see there's some observation towers. It's incredibly windy, as we'll read here. So he climbed Mont Ventoux in 1336 and wrote this letter about it. So what I thought we could do to start with is, why don't we just read the letter aloud here. And just a quick mention here, this Dionisio da Borgo San Sepolcro was an Augustinian friar who was his confessor in Avignon, and he'll become a little bit important in the letter itself because of a moment that I find myself somewhat magical when I read it, that he's going to get a book out on top of the mountain, and he got the book from this Augustinian friar. So I think there's about 8 or 9 paragraphs. I'm wondering if people would be willing to volunteer to read one of the paragraphs. And so if I probably can't see everybody, because I think we have 2 screens here, but if you could raise your hand or give some sort of sign on there, or you could chat to say you'd be willing to read, that would be great. Okay, so I saw Trip Kennan, then Alicia Vannon.
Yeah, Michael, if they use the raise hand function, you'll be able to keep track of it in the participant list. So that might be a strategy.
Good idea. Yeah. And I've got to actually put the participant list up on my screen here.
And I can help with that too. If you're sharing the screen, I could recognize people in turn if you'd like me to.
That'd be wonderful. So I think we got 3 in a row there. And then maybe, yeah, Dr. Thomas can from there call on people. And if people don't raise their hands, that means I'm going to read. You don't want that. That's a lot. So
So it looks like we could use 4 more volunteers before we get too far into it.
Yeah.
Okay, we're getting there.
I think there's some more hands in there, are there?
Yeah, we need 2 more, 1 more, and we're good. You need to set 8, is that right?
I think 8 should be good, yeah.
So 1 more, please. Someone step up.
Okay. Yeah, maybe Charlie, you could call on them,
Sure.
At the end of each paragraph, call on the next one then. We got our first 3 lined up, so I think we're ready.
Yep, we're good.
Okay, and I'll go ahead and mention this now because you might want it later. If you go to the chat, the link that we're going to be reading from is there. So if you want it later, like when I'm reading my paper and you'd like to look back at the letter, you can just click that link in the chat and it'll open it up. But what I'm going to do is I'll share the screen so we're all looking at the website from mine.
That's good. I was starting to panic, thinking, did I miss the document? Because I just agreed to read it.
Exactly. I thought you all had it memorized. Was there some miscommunication here? All right. So I think Trip Kennan was up first. So go ahead and start us off again. Take a paragraph and we'll go from there. So starting with "Today I made."
Thank you, Dr. Crom. Today I made the ascent of the highest mountain in this region, which is not improperly called Ventosum. My only motive was the wish to see what so great an elevation had to offer. I had the expedition in my mind for many years, for, as you know, I had lived in this region from infancy, having been cast here by the fate which determines the affairs of men. Consequently, the mountain, which is visible from a great distance, was ever before my eyes, and I conceived the plan of some time doing what I have at last accomplished today. The idea took hold upon me with special force when, in reading Livy's History of Rome yesterday, I happened upon the place where Philip of Macedon, the same who waged war against the Romans, ascended Mount Haemus in Thessaly, from whose summit he was able, it is said, to see 2 seas, the Adriatic and the Euxine. Whether this be true or false, I have not been able to determine, for the mountain is too far away, and writers disagree. Papanus Melia, the cosmographer, not to mention others who have spoken of the occurrence, admit its truth without hesitation. Titus Livius, on the other hand, considers it false. I certainly should not have left the question long in doubt, had that mountain been as easy to explore as this one. Let us leave this matter one side, however, and return to my mountain here. It seems to me that a young man in private life may well be excused for attempting what an aged king could undertake without arousing criticism.
And Trip was coming to us from Macon, Georgia. I know that, but Alicia, you're next, and I'm not sure where you're coming from. So perhaps you could tell us that.
Oh, Vancouver Island, Canada, Vancouver Island University. Okay. You want me to read the next paragraph down to brother? Is that correct?
Yes, please.
Okay. When I came to look about for a companion, I found, strangely enough, that hardly one among my friends seemed suitable. So rarely do we meet with just the right combination of personal tastes and characteristics, even among those who are dearest to us. This one was too apathetic, that one over anxious, this one too slow, that one too hasty. One was too sad, another over cheerful, one more simple, another more sagacious than I desired. I feared this one's, give me a hard one, taciturnity, and that one's loquacity. Loquaciousness? Anyways, the heavy deliberation of some repelled me as much as the lean incapacity of others. I rejected those who were likely to irritate me by a cold want of interest, as well as those who might be weary to me by their excessive enthusiasm. Such defects, however grave, could be borne with at home, for charity suffereth all things, and friendship accepts any burden. But it is quite otherwise on a journey where every weakness becomes much more serious. So, as I was bent upon pleasure and anxious that my enjoyment should be unalloyed, I looked about me with unusual care, balanced against one another the various characteristics of my friends, and without committing any breach of friendship, I silently condemned every trait which might prove disagreeable on the way. And would you believe it? I finally turned homeward for aid and proposed the ascent to my only brother, who is younger than I, and with whom you're all well acquainted. He was delighted and gratified beyond measure by the thought of holding the place of a friend as well as of a brother.
All right.
Thank you, Alicia. Amelia, you're up next. And please tell us where you're coming from.
No worries. Hi, I'm from also Macon, Georgia, from Mercer. Go Bears. All right. At the time fixed, we left the house and by the evening reached Marceline, which lies at the foot of the mountain to the north. Having rested there a day, we finally made the ascent this morning, with no companions except 2 servants, and a most difficult task it was. The mountain is deep and almost a mass of stony soil, but as the poet has well said, remorseless toil conquers all. It was a long day, the air fine. We enjoyed the advantages of vigor of mind and strength, the advantages of vigor of mind and strength, and agility of body, and everything else essential to those engaged in such an undertaking, and so had no other difficulties to face than those of the region itself. We found an old shepherd in one of the mountain dales, who tried at great length to dissuade us from the ascent, saying that some 50 years before he had, in the same ardor of youth, reached the summit, but had gotten for his pains nothing except fatigue and regret, and clothes and body torn by rocks and briars. No one, so far as he or his companions knew, had ever tried the ascent before or after him. But his counsels increased rather than diminished our desire to proceed, since youth is suspicious of warnings. So the old man, finding that his efforts were in vain, went a little way with us, and pointed out a rough path among the rocks, uttering many admonitions, which he continued to send after us even after we had left him behind, surrendering to him all such garments or other possessions as might prove burdensome to us. We made ready for the ascent and started off at a good pace. But, as usually happens, fatigue quickly followed upon our excessive exertion, and we soon came to a halt at the top of a certain cliff. Upon starting on again, we went more slowly, and I especially advanced along the rocky way with a more deliberate step. While my brother chose a direct path straight up the ridge, I weakly took an easier one, which really descended. When I was called back and the right road was shown me, I replied that I hoped to find a better way around the other side, and that I did not mind going farther if the path replied that I hoped to find a better way round the other. Whoopsie, my apologies. And that I did not mind going farther if the path were only less steep. There we go. This was just an excuse for my laziness, and when the others had already reached a considerable height, I was still wandering in the valleys. I had failed to find an easier path, and had only increased the distance and difficulty of the ascent. At last I became disgusted with the intricate way I had chosen, and resolved to ascend without more ado. When I reached my, oh, thank you, I appreciate it. When I reached my brother, who, while waiting for me, had an ample opportunity for rest, I was tired and irritated. We walked along together for a time, but hardly had we passed the first spur when I forgot about the circuitous route which I had just tried, and took a lower one again. Once more, I followed an easy roundabout path through the winding valleys, only to find myself soon in my old difficulty. I was simply trying to avoid the exertion of the ascent, but no human ingenuity can alter the nature of things or the cause of anything to reach a height by going down. Suffice it to say that, much to my vexation and my brother's amusement, I made the same mistake 3 times more during a few hours. Thank you.
Very good.
Sorry, Javi, you're next. Thanks, Amelia. Let us know where you're coming from, Javi.
Sure, thanks. I'm coming from Washington, D.C. So awesome. After being frequently misled in this way, I finally sat down in a valley and transferred my winged thoughts from the things corporeal to the immaterial, addressing myself as follows. What thou hast repeatedly experienced today in the ascent of this mountain happens to thee, as to many, in the journey toward the blessed life. And this is not so readily perceived by men, since the motions of the body are obvious and external, while those of the soul are invisible and hidden. Yes, the life which we call blessed is to be sought for on a high eminence, and straight is the way that leads to it. Many also are the hills that lie between, and we must ascend by a glorious stairway from strength to strength. At the top is at once the end of our struggles and the goal for which we are bound. All wish to reach this goal, but as Ovid says, to wish is little, we must long with the utmost eagerness to gain our end. Thou certainly dost ardently desire, as well as simply wish, unless thou deceivest thyself in this matter, as in so many others. What, then, dost hold thee back? Nothing, assuredly, except that thou wouldst take a path which seems at first thought more easy, leading through low and worldly pleasures. But nevertheless, in the end, after long wanderings, thou must perforce either climb the steeper path under the burden of tasks foolishly deferred to its blessed culmination, or lie down in the valley of thy sins, and, I shudder to think of it, if the shadow of death overtake thee, spend an eternal night amid constant torments. These thoughts stimulated both body and mind in a wonderful degree for facing the difficulties which yet remained. Oh, that I might traverse in spirit that other road for which I long day and night, even as today I overcame material obstacles by my bodily exertions. And I know not why it should not be far easier, since the swift, immortal soul can reach its goal in the twinkling of an eye, without passing through space, while my progress today was necessarily slow, dependent as I was upon a failing body weighed down by heavy members.
Thanks, Javi. Emma, you're up. Please let us know where you're coming from.
Hi, my name is Emma. She, they are my pronouns, and I'm coming from Lake Alicia, Vancouver Island University. One peak of the mountain, the highest of all, the country people call sunny. Why, I do not know, unless by antiphrasis, as I have sometimes suspected in other instances, for the peak in question would seem to be the father of all the surrounding ones. On its top is a little level place, and here we could at last rest our tired bodies. Now, my father, since you have followed the thoughts that spurred me on in my ascent, listen to the rest of the story and devote 1 hour, I pray you, to reviewing the experiences of my entire day. At first, owing to the unaccustomed quality of the air and the effect of the great sweep of view spread out before me, I stood like one dazed. I beheld the clouds under our feet, and what I had read of Athos and Olympus seemed less incredible as I myself witnessed the same things from a mountain of less fame. I turned my eyes towards Italy, whither my heart most inclined. The Alps, rugged and snow-capped, seemed to rise close by, although they were really at a great distance. The same Alps through which that fierce enemy of the Roman name once made his way, bursting the rocks, if we may believe the report, by the application of vinegar. I sighed, I must confess, for the skies of Italy, which I beheld rather with my mind than with my eyes. An inexpressible longing came over me to see once more my friend and my country. At the same time, I reproached myself for this double weakness, springing, as it did, from a soul not yet steeled to manly resistance. And yet there were excuses for both of these cravings, and a number of distinguished writers might be summoned to support me.
Thanks, Emma. Looks like Ella, you're next. Where are you coming from, Ella?
Hi there, I'm Ella Hashi. I'm coming today from Concordia University, Irvine in California, and I'll go ahead and get started. Then a new idea took possession of me, and I shifted my thoughts to a consideration of time rather than place. Today, it is 10 years since, having completed my youthful studies, thou didst leave Bologna. Dear eternal God, in the name of immutable wisdom, think what alterations in thy character this intervening period has beheld. I pass over 1,000 instances. I am not yet in a safe harbor where I can calmly recall the past storms. The time may come when I can review and order all the experiences of the past, saying with St. Augustine, I desire to recall my foul actions and carnal corruption of my soul, not because I love them, but that I may the more love thee, O my God. Much that is doubtful and evil still clings to me. But what I once loved that I have no longer. And yet, what am I saying? I still love it, but with shame and with heaviness of heart. Now, at last, I have confessed the truth. So it is. I love, but love what I would not love, what I would that I might hate. Though loath to do so, though constrained, though sad and sorrowing, still I do love. And I feel in my miserable self that the truth of the well-known words, I will hate if I can, if not, I will love against my will. 3 years have not passed since the perverse and wicked passion, which had a firm grasp upon me and held undisputed sway in my heart, began to discover a rebellious opponent who was unwilling longer to yield obedience. These two adversaries, having joined in close combat for the supremacy, and for a long time now, a harassing and doubtful war has been waged in the field of my thoughts. Thus, I turned over the last 10 years of my mind, and then, fixing my anxious gaze on the future, I asked myself, if, perchance, thou shouldest prolong this uncertain life of mine for yet 2 lustres, and shouldest make an advance toward virtue proportionate to the distance to which thou hast departed from thine original infatuation during the past 2 years, since the new longing first encountered the old, couldst thou, on reaching thy 40th year, face death, if not with complete assurance, at least with hopefulness, calmly dismissing from my thoughts the residuum of life as it faced into old age.
Excellent. Thanks, Ella. Henry, you're next. Where are you coming from?
I'm from Spartanburg, South Carolina, but right now I'm in Macon, Georgia at Mercer University. These and similar reflections occurred to me, my father. I rejoiced in my progress, mourned my weaknesses, and commiserated the universal instability of human conduct. I had well nigh forgotten where I was and our object in coming, but at last I dismissed my anxieties, which were better suited to other surroundings, and resolved to look about me and see what we had come to see. The sinking sun and the lengthening shadows of the mountain were already warning us that the time was near at hand when we must go. As I suddenly wakened from my sleep, I turned about and gazed toward the west. I was unable to discern the summits of the Pyrenees, which form the barrier between France and Spain, not because of any intervening obstacle that I know of, but owing simply to the insufficiency of our mortal vision. But I could see with utmost clearness, off to the right, the mountains of the region about Lyons, and to the left of the Bay of Marseille, and the waters that lash the shores of Aigues Mortes. Although all these places were so distant that it would require a journey of several days to reach them. Under our very eyes flowed the Rhone.
I'm afraid we're out of volunteers. Would someone like to read? Ooh, it's a long one. That's intimidating. All right, Miriam, sorry, please.
Okay, I'm coming at you from Tulsa, Oklahoma, University of Tulsa. Okay. While I was thus dividing my thoughts, now turning my attention to some terrestrial object that lay before me, now raising my soul as I had done my body to higher planes, it occurred to me to look into my copy of St. Augustine's Confessions, a gift that I owe to your love, and that I always have about me in memory of both the author and the giver. I opened the compact little volume, small indeed in size, but of infinite charm, with the intention of reading whatever came to hand, for I could happen upon nothing that would be otherwise than edifying and devout. Now it chanced that the 10th book presented itself. My brother, waiting to hear something of St. Augustine's from my lips, stood attentively by. I call him, and God too, to witness that where I first fixed my eyes, it was written, and men go about to wonder at the heights of the mountains and the mighty waves of the sea and the wide sweep of rivers and the circuit of the ocean and the revolution of the stars, but themselves they consider not. I was abashed and, asking my brother, who was anxious to hear more, not to annoy me, I closed the book, angry with myself that I should still be admiring earthly things who might long ago have learned from even the pagan philosophers that nothing is wonderful but the soul, which, when great itself, finds nothing great outside itself. Then, in truth, I was satisfied that I had seen enough of the mountain. I turned my inward eye upon myself, and from that time not a syllable fell from my lips until we reached the bottom again. Those words had given me occupation enough, for I could not believe that it was by a mere accident that I had happened upon them. What I had there read I believed to be addressed to me and to no other, remembering that St. Augustine had once suspected the same thing in his own case, when, on opening the book of the Apostle, as he himself tells us, the first words that he saw there were, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying, but put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof. The same thing happened earlier to St. Anthony, when he was listening to the gospel where it was written, if thou wilt be perfect, go and sell that thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. Believing the scripture to have been read for his especial benefit, as his biographer Athanasius says, he guided himself by its aid to the kingdom of heaven. And as Anthony, thank you, and as Anthony...
I'll scroll to the, there we go.
All right, thank you.
You got a really long one. Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. And as Anthony, on hearing these words, waited for nothing more, and as Augustine, upon reading the apostles' admonition, sought no farther, so I concluded my reading in the few words which I have given. I thought in silence of the lack of good counsel in us mortals, who neglect what is noblest in ourselves, scatter our energies in all directions, and waste ourselves in a vain show, because we look about us for what is to be found only within. I wondered at the natural nobility of our soul, save when it debases itself of its own free will and deserts its original estate, turning what God has given it for its honor into dishonor. How many times, think you, did I turn back that day to glance at the summit of the mountain, which seemed scarcely a cubit high compared with the range of human contemplation, when it is not immersed in the foul mire of the earth? With every downward step, I ask myself this: if we are ready to endure so much sweat and labor in order that we may bring our bodies a little nearer to heaven, how can a soul struggling toward God up the steeps of human pride and human destiny fear any cross or prison or sting of fortune? How few, I thought, but are diverted from their path by the fear of difficulties or the love of ease. How happy the lot of those few, if any such there be. It is of them, assuredly, that the poet was thinking when he wrote, happy the man who is skilled to understand nature's hid causes, who beneath his feet all terrors casts, and death's relentless dooms, and the loud roar of greedy Acheron. How earnestly should we strive not to stand on mountaintops, but to trample beneath us those appetites which spring from earthly impulses, with no consciousness of the difficulties of the way. Amidst these preoccupations which I have so frankly revealed, we came, long after dark, but with the full moon lending us its friendly light, to the little inn which we had left that morning before dawn. That time during which the servants have been occupied in preparing our supper, I have spent in a secluded part of the house, hurriedly jotting down these experiences on the spur of the moment, lest, in case my task were postponed, my mood should change on leaving the place, and so my interest in riding flag. Do you want me to finish it off, or?
Yeah, go for it. Thank you.
All right. You will see, my dearest father, that I wish nothing to be concealed from you, for I am careful to describe to you not only my life in general, but even my individual reflections. And I beseech you, in turn, to pray that these vague and wandering thoughts of mine may sometime become firmly fixed, and, after having been vainly tossed about from one interest to another, may direct themselves at last toward the single, true, certain, and everlasting good.
Thank you, everybody. That's wonderful. And it's great to, I think the first time you say something, right, in one of these events, you gain a little confidence that you can speak again. So I hope everyone who hasn't got a chance to speak will get a chance at some point, if not in this session, then in ones to come. I want to highlight the date here, April 26th. So this was written, this event took place April 26, 1336. So a lot of people this year are thinking about Dante because the 700th anniversary of his death is this coming September 14th. We have some papers on Dante, I think right after this session, actually. Petrarch, 685 years ago, this April 26th, which is a Monday. It's my oldest son's birthday, so it's easy for me to remember, April 26th. Remember that. Maybe try to take an effort to get outside if you have anything like a mountain or a top of a building you can climb, and try to remember this event with Petrarch. So I'm going to read my paper, and then it looks like we don't have a lot of time. We'll have some time for conversation. And I do want to say something that I think connects very well with an introduction to ACTC. One of the things I love about ACTC, in addition to bringing together people from all over the world with, incredible different interests and texts, but sharing in common the love of the written word, is that it's not about expertise in scholarship. It's about these great texts that have been written throughout history that have spoken to us. So I'm not a Petrarch scholar. I didn't even bother to get the Latin. I did try to find the Latin, actually, and I couldn't get it easily on the internet, so I gave up the search. This is just a letter I stumbled across that I found really spoke to me personally, and I think connects very well with a lot of the themes in a liberal arts education and with our conference theme. So I'll go ahead and read my paper then, and then we'll open things up for your questions and comments. On April 26, 1336, Petrarch, father of the Renaissance, climbed Mont Ventoux just for the pleasure of doing so. While this is sometimes seen as a mark of the transition to modernity, Petrarch himself spoke of this in Augustinian terms. Upon reaching the summit, he read a passage from Confessions and reproached himself for marveling at the nature without rather than the truly wondrous nature within. Petrarch's discovery of the interior man speaks to us today, and our fear that there is no logos behind the flux of experience, that we are as divided from ourselves and from one another by time and space and face masks as one mountain climber is from another. And he does so by pointing not forward to the postmodern, but back to the classical. The idea of traveling simply for pleasure could be seen as distinctly modern, as a precursor to the modern tourist. When we think of travelers in ancient medieval times, we generally find something purposive about their wanderings. Odysseus is trying to return home, Herodotus recording great deeds for posterity, Aeneas refounding a city, Augustine searching for God, Dante entering the eternal, and Chaucer on pilgrimage. By contrast, the modern tourist follows his or her fancy wherever it leads. She just wants to gawk at things, to eat new foods, and to bring home some trinkets, take some selfies. In the classical world, even as desacralized by Christianity, peoples and places were imbued with meaning. In the modern world, peoples and places are objects to be consumed. Once one rejects the existence of final causes, the world is not sacrament from which one hopes to receive self-knowledge, but one's oyster, from which one takes treasures for self-creation. The ancient traveler goes to Delphi, only to be told that the answer "know thyself" was already in the soul. The modern traveler goes to New York to be told to assert his will on the world, Rockefeller's personal creed. We have someone from Amsterdam. I wrote this paper without that in mind. Or to Amsterdam, only to be told to laugh at the possibility of finding wisdom here. So there is a fake kind of classical column in Amsterdam that has written at the top of it, "Homo sapiens non urinat in ventum." The wise man does not piss in the wind. That's the wisdom we get in Amsterdam. Petrarch himself may have intended his journey up the mountain as a meaningless event, as an assertion that the good life comes to those who create their personal narratives. As he puts it, "My only motive was the wish to see what so great an elevation had to offer." This speaks to the modern celebration of curiosity and whimsicality, rather than the classical concern with wonder and prudence. Even when we celebrate intellectual life today, we place the emphasis on personal interest, desires, and making, choose your path, rather than on finding one's place within the whole, discover your calling. More generally, we could say that mountain climbing as a sport is a modern invention, precisely due to the rejection of nature as purposive. Once nature is seen as raw materials and efficient causes, it is now either a puzzle to be solved, an instrument for the betterment of human comfort, or an obstacle to be overcome. Mountain climbers speak of peak bagging, an image reminiscent of Machiavelli's comparison of fortune to a lady who is conquered by force. Think, for example, of Sir Edmund Hillary's ascent of Mount Everest. After an earlier failed attempt, he is supposed to have given her a bold warning, "I will come again and conquer you." Upon fulfilling his promise, the newspaper exuberantly proclaimed to the world that Everest had indeed been conquered. The classical view sees nature as source of meaning and even as sacramental. On such a view, Hillary did not conquer Everest, but embraced her. And in this lies the significance of the event. Returning to Petrarch, I believe this is what we see in him, that his proto-modern journey turns out to be a reassertion of the older view, rather than the creation of a new one. Our first clue to this is the inspiration he took from reading Livy's History of Rome. Petrarch saw himself as returning to and modeling himself on the lives of those who came before. As he says in another letter regarding Rome, the problem is not that the Romans of his time failed to be forward-looking, but that they were ignorant of the Roman story and thus unable to rise again. He does not call for new virtues, as Machiavelli did, but a return to the old. Quote, "I bewail not ignorance alone, but the flight and exile of many virtues," end quote. The study of history then is simultaneously a return to the given and transcendent, to living in accordance with the cardinal virtues of our eternal seeking nature. Thus, our second clue comes in the ascent itself, in which Petrarch blames himself for the vice of laziness. Rather than lament his lack of high-tech gear or curse the mountain for its stubbornness, Petrarch sees her as a teacher and authority. Halfway through the journey, he found himself constantly, quote, looking for an easy way, thereby landing in much difficulty. Thus, I kept putting off the trouble of climbing, but man's wit can't alter the nature of things, and there is no way for anyone to reach the heights by going downward, end quote. Petrarch's ascent of Mont Ventoux was not an attempt to conquer nature, but to submit to her, to learn about nature's greatness and man's frailty. Further still, it was an attempt to let grace build upon nature. Third and finally, then, we come to the Augustinian view itself. As he neared the top, his mind turned from the corporeal to the spiritual. As he rested in a valley, he cursed himself for following a path in life leading through low and worldly pleasures. Upon reaching the peak, the dizzying view spurred an inward turn and confession of his past sins. With Augustine as guide, he had a pocket edition of Confessions on hand. And I want to pause. I find that so wondrous to picture this man 700 years ago climbing a mountain, and he has a pocket book of Augustine that was written 900 years before him. It's amazing to try to picture that in our minds, that this wonderful book that he had in his possession is given to him by a good friend. So when he got the book out, he underwent an inward and then upward conversion that carried him down the mountain. And this is that long quote that was so wonderfully read. I thought in silence of the lack of good counsel in us mortals, who neglect what is noblest in ourselves, scatter our energies in all directions, and waste ourselves in a vain show, because we look about us for what is to be found only within. I wondered the natural nobility of our soul, save when it debases itself of its own free will and deserts its original state, turning what God has given it for its honor into dishonor. Petrarch is a Renaissance man, perhaps because he does not see his modernity in conflict with the classical. In other words, by celebrating the greatness of the pagans, he does not thereby disdain the humility of the Christians. As he put it midway through his life's journey, quote, let us call ancient whatever preceded the celebration and veneration of Christ's name in Rome, modern, everything from then to our time, end quote. Humans are neither passive recipients of meaning nor creator gods. Rather, humans are co-creators and free of those subordinate participants in God's yes saying. Petrarch may be seen as the founder of an alternative modernity, one that emphasized the compatibility between the ancients and medievals by adhering to the traditional prioritizing of the contemplative over the active, and which would later pass from him to Montaigne to Pascal, on to Tocqueville and to Maritain. Finally, a note about the conference theme. Every time we look to the stars or to texts from other times and places, we open ourselves up to the possibility of a Mont Ventoux experience. Perhaps we think that all is relative or maybe just perspective, but our natural desire to know will constantly challenge this. For Petrarch 685 years ago, and for us today, the words of St. Augustine reach across the ages and to the eternal. And men go about to wonder at the heights of the mountains and the mighty waves of the sea and the wide sweep of the rivers and the circuit of the ocean and the revolution of the stars, but themselves they consider not. As educators, as students, which all of us are here together, students, to these great minds scattered through time and space in the hopes that they will find their place among them. We try to help our students and ourselves through these texts join at least occasionally these great souls on the lofty peaks from which we can look outward, inward, and upward. All right, well, thank you for your attentiveness, and look forward to comments or questions. And I guess I'll trust it to Dr. Thomas to do that. Oh, thank you. Get the applause in there. Good. It feels like the real thing. Trust me, when you put those up there, it feels like the real thing. Maybe Professor Thomas could, so people could raise their hands and Professor Thomas could field questions. That might go a little bit better. So go
Very
ahead.
happy to do that. You just use the
Great.
raise hand function and we'll call on you. Jacob Holleran, where are you coming from?
I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I go to St. Vincent College. I'm a sophomore. I just had a question. Do you think that Petrarch, after this experience, would completely forsake looking at nature for its own sake at the expense of the soul? Or do you think that he would argue that to rightly view nature in the first place, you have to do so first by contemplating the interior life?
Good question. And I think that does actually go to the theme of the classical, the ancient and the medieval. So think of in the symposium where Socrates has that ascent of love from body to bodies to soul and to knowledge and up to beauty itself. One thing in Plato, as I understand him, is that he does think that it's like a ladder. When we get to the higher stages, we no longer care. We see as beneath us and as paltry, those lower forms of love. I don't think that's true. I don't think a Christian would say that. And I think Petrarch, to the extent to which this was a religious experience for him, I think he want to say that nature is an image of the eternal. And so by gazing at its beauty, we're not turning away from the eternal, but it's an occasion for doing so. I'm speculating because I don't know later on Petrarch, what he had to say about that, but I would think that Petrarch continues that love of nature, but it's a transfigured love, I think we might want to say.
I'll abuse my power and say, yeah, the thing that gets me is that he clearly, as he climbs, his mind is turned to all those things, which later in the letter he elevates as important. And yet he doesn't seem to acknowledge the connection between the journey up the mountain and that the experience of it actually prompted him to be introspective or perhaps to be spiritual in some other way, look at God rather than himself. But they're clearly connected in the narrative account of what happens. I go to climb the mountain and here's what happens to my thoughts. But he doesn't seem to acknowledge that connection.
Yeah, and then at the end where he says the mountain just looked like no bigger than a cubit, at the end. I would think though, it's actually, I've read a little of Sir Edmund Hillary and his reflections on climbing Everest, that you often get mountain climbers explain a kind of bittersweet, like, this is what I came to see, but now it's over, because so I think that later on, he probably looks back at the mountain and it becomes an occasion for revisiting all of this. But at the time, it seemed like it's a mountain, nothing, no.
Henry, you're up.
Yeah, so just the idea of like the mountain climbing, like what you just mentioned, kind of relates to it. But that idea of sort of the modern traveler is focused on only the result at the end, right? The view, and how Petrarch has told us to sort of leave that aside, trample that underfoot. So, for example, maybe 2 summers ago, there's Mount Rogers. It's the highest peak in Virginia. And when I went on this trip, that's all they told us about it, was that it was the highest peak. And you get all the way up to the top, and it's covered in spruce trees. You can't see anything. And kind of the whole point of our trip when we were out there was not that we were tourists, rather, but pilgrims. And it's more about the journey and what it forces you to reflect on. So I think that there's this evolution that as Petrarch goes up the mountain, he starts as a tourist, right? He wants to conquer the mountain. And you can see that especially because he takes the easy path. And then again, it reemphasizes the point of him changing from tourist to pilgrim when he passes the first spur, right? He mentions passing the first spur, and then he forgets all about the circuitous routes that he takes. And it's just sort of that evolution that I think that is removed a lot because of sort of a different worldview of going. It's what you're going for, right? And then some people, what they go for doesn't change, and some people what they go for does change, and then sometimes you just go for a different thing. So in your opinion, what do you think that sort of theme carries on, maybe not in the rest of Petrarch's writing, but just sort of in the with the emphasis on Augustine, and then like transferring from a classics perspective into the pre-modern and medieval, just that evolution of like, what are we here to do and what are we here to observe, right?
Yeah, and I think, yeah, there's a lot, gosh, that's great. There's a lot that you're thinking on there. Maybe I'll just make two comments. One, the first one, you got me thinking of technology, that when we go to have those experiences, it's very hard for us to resist to immediately want to communicate it to the world, on Facebook, or, take a selfie or something. And I think we need to be open to the possibility that impulse should be shut down, that desire to get out the camera and capture it and communicate with my friends is holding us back from maybe something else, something higher that we could be doing in that occasion. Like Plato talks about the problem of writing, that when you write things down, it's actually bad for your memory. And there's something similar with the photograph. You don't bother to look at it because you kind of think, I'll look at it later. So Americans are awful in Europe for this regard, right? That we kind of just walk by things in Europe. Oh, that's where you're supposed to see the Eiffel Tower from right there. I got the photo, I go on to the next thing I'm supposed to be seeing. And so we don't really ever see things as a result. Another thing though, I think, just to kind of go into the modern, thinking about Machiavelli in that letter where he talks about walking through, I think it's his property, and to him it's all just money, right? The trees are timber for money making, that nature is simply a means to conquer and to satisfy desire. I know some of you are going to get us into transcendentalism this conference, and we might think on that. I think there's something a little different in Thoreau or Emerson than Petrarch. I think something profoundly different, but also they're closer to one another than, say, Machiavelli would be to either of them. So those are just some thoughts. It's a really, really good question.
We have about 6 minutes and 3 people on the queue. So Trip, Abby, and Amelia, but Trip first.
First of all, I'd like to say I absolutely loved your paper. As an avid outdoorsman and climbing mountains, it was all up my alley. Dr. Thomas definitely hit on something that I was really upset like reading the paper. As he's sort of like climbing up this mountain, he's forgetting that somehow the mountain is the thing that's sort of like inciting him to look upward or inward within himself. I just wanted to ask, because I think that the material thing that like he's doing is so important to get there. How do we sort of like get people to look within themselves? Why we're giving them the material things? You set the example of like looking at the Eiffel Tower, or like or even just like climbing up a mountain. I mean, you said he was doing it for fun, but yet still somehow he came to this conclusion. So how do we get from sort of like the material to this immaterial introspection? Can we get this like within the modern, like in modern times, or is it just something that we have to know? What is going on like within him as he's going up this mountain that sort of like drives it to him? Because I mean, it has something to do with the mountain itself, but I mean, I'm still having trouble like how we get from point A to point B.
Yeah, that's a good question. And of course, I think there's, to some extent, it's person to person, right? That there are different things that speak to people. But certainly there are things like silence. So I encourage actually a St. John's connection. I'm blanking on her name. Lost in Thought is the name of the book, came out from Princeton Press last year. And she has 3 conditions for leisure: free time, connection with nature, and an emptiness of mind, which I love that expression, because we tend to think we need to fill our minds. Isn't that what school is, right? You fill your mind with lots of stuff, and then you put them on exams. And she points to the need to empty our minds. And so there's obviously different practices. I mean, Zena hits, thank you. Yeah, there's some different practices for doing that. I myself very much connect with backpacking and the outdoors the way that you do. But but other people could be other things. So think of this conference, right? I mean, why are you here? Why did we come for this conference? And probably we all find within our own souls a variety of reasons, some selfish, some very good ones. And hopefully we find that something in the conference we had not anticipated. We say, wow, that's really going to change the way I'm going to think about myself or about this particular, whatever it may be. So anyway, that's just, yeah, good question.
Abby.
So I was thinking about, you talked about how like the connection from Augustine and then to Petrarch. And I was thinking even further, it just popped into my mind. I was like, blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yes.
Yeah, I was like, oh my goodness, like we have another like modern connection, and his motto, verso l'alto, to the heights. Yeah, I just wanted to bring up that connection because that's what popped into my mind.
That is excellent. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, so there are within some Catholic circles today, there are these, kind of circles committed to outdoors hiking in the name of this 20th century, man who was an avid outdoorsman. One thing I'll just mention along those lines is, so I'm in a Benedictine institution, and Petrarch devoted his letters to a Benedictine in Flanders. Benedictines and Franciscans have two different ways of thinking about nature. So when we think of St. Francis, people think of the tree hugging, the brother bear and sister moon, all this stuff, just simply letting it be, right? Whereas the Benedictine way is a more stewardship model, that nature is to be cared for like a garden, it's not to be exploited. That's a very different thing. I think that's the Machiavelli. So going back, I think to Tripp's question too, we could say that, or Henry's question, I think it was Tripp's, yeah, that there may be different relationships to nature. Loving nature doesn't mean necessarily not touching it. It means helping to cultivate beautiful things sometimes. So good, yeah, very good.
Amelia.
Alrighty, I will try to be quick. So I'm fascinated. No, I wish to lower my hand. Thank you. So I'm fascinated with this idea of suffering in Petrarch. Specifically, is suffering necessary to come to this moment of fulfillment, enlightenment, especially going through the briars, going through the valley 3 times, which I think is always hilarious. It cracks me up. And there's this element of suffering in Augustine too that he brings up. So I'm wondering, in your opinion, based on your research and writings, is suffering necessary to achieve this moment of satisfaction or enlightenment?
Yeah, and this goes back to the question about, how to get people to have these kinds of moments in their lives. Remember the old man who says, don't do it. I did it. It was just, I got suffering, pain, and I got nothing out of it, but a sunburn and, a rash and that sort of thing. That he didn't get past that, right? So I would say the answer is yes. And maybe one way of getting it, this is part of, Plato's on my mind because I just read his speech on love, is that what I don't think Socrates gives us is love as self-sacrificial. Love for him is all about wanting to get this object, the beauty itself, but he doesn't emphasize the way that lovers need to be willing to sacrifice. So to the extent to which we want to be lovers, and that is, I think we share that in common with Petrarch, that love is the highest. You can't love without suffering. It's actually central, central to it. Maybe probably don't have time for one more question because we want to say a few things and then break. This is a good problem.
Yeah, we really do. But Miriam is the last person with her hand up, and she did that remarkable favor to us all for reading for 2 pages or something. So let's get her a question in, and then we do need to wrap up pretty quickly, Professor Crum, because we have another session at 2:15, and we all need a little bit of a break. So.
Thank you. I'll try to make this quick. First, I just want to say that, thanks for picking this out. I really liked this letter, and one of my favorite things is to read old letters. So, and I've only known Petrarch through his poetry about Laura. So it was really cool to read. And I found myself thinking of these connections that I had, I made really personal connections to it, especially these moments where his brother is amused at him. I have 3 sisters, so I totally get those moments. And I had a moment too, a sort of similar moment where I was with a bunch of friends at my school, and we were camping out, and we went to go kind of explore these trails in the forest, and we were supposed to stay together, but me and my friend kind of got lost a little bit. And we sort of panicked a little bit, but then we took that moment and it was really nice. Like no signal at all outside. It was really nice to just kind of like look around. We were a little scared, but it was really nice to look around and take in all the nature. So I made that really nice connection between what we just read and like that. So I was wondering if you would be willing to share a moment that you had, if it's something similar like that, if you have something.
I am prepared for that question, actually. So, I mean, just accidentally. So, but yeah, again, thank you for your reading that you did the lion's share. And it was just that passage I think you wanted to, kind of connect with you. I want to show you really quickly to entice you to come to campus next year for the conference. We have a 1576 copy of Petrarch's sonnets at our campus. We have a nice rare book collection. Those of you who love Chaucer, we have one of only 12 Caxton copies of the Canterbury Tales on our campus. So I just discovered this last week and was able to take a photo of it. So it's beautiful. Okay, so this I think is a good way to wrap up, actually. So I was a chemistry major in college. I went to a place kind of like St. John's College. I know we have a couple of people from St. John's, at least in some of its programs. So I was up, I went hiking, and there was this incredible sunset over the Berkeley Hills. And I was really, almost physically hitting myself that I had such an impoverished vocabulary that I couldn't communicate this experience, that all I could say was like awesome or cool, words that I use for hamburgers, right? I mean, so it was this awareness that growing in your ability to communicate, which often consists in reading these great texts, is central to unpacking these moments in our life. And that moment, it really was, I think, part of my deciding maybe this philosophy thing is for me, because I'm thinking more along these lines than I am about molecules and matter in motion and that sort of thing. So thank you for the question. We have to wrap up, and here's what I wanted to point this out to you in the chat. I put the program on the chat. You can download it in case you don't have it. It says
Professor Crum, let's double check they can see that. Sometimes when you put something on a chat before people join the meeting, they don't have access to it. So
Okay.
Do you guys have access to that document? No, they don't. So you need to share it again, please.
There it goes. I just sent it again. So what I'm going to do is let's just quickly look at this, because again, we do want to give some time for people to transition to the next one. Sorry, I've got to, how do I get myself to the, sorry, I've got to, all right, sorry, give me just a second here. It's not, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so after this, 2:15, so coming right up here, we have the two different panels here. I would read all of these, but I think we need to cut short on time here. So make sure our moderators and everyone knows where they're going for these two different panels from 2:15 to 3:45. After that, 4 o'clock to 5:30, we have two panels as well, and these are our last panels of the afternoon. There's our moderators again. Tomorrow morning, we start bright and early at 9 o'clock, especially for our Californian. And I am a Californian, by the way, too, so I can commiserate with you being on the West Coast right now, and our Canadians that are from Vancouver Island. So 9 o'clock tomorrow, we have two panels. 11 o'clock, another panel here. There are two different panels. Then our last panel is at 1:15 on Saturday, Eastern Standard Time. And then Dr. Thomas is going to bring us on home at 3 o'clock tomorrow with Being Honored, Being Deserving. We're going to talk about how you can submit your papers for publication. And then we're going to talk also about next year. So one thing, let me just encourage you too, is to think of that mountain ascent. It's probably very tempting for us to not come to sessions when we're kind of feeling like, it's 70 degrees in Latrobe in early April. That's not very common. It might be nice to just, so encourage you to really push and to support one another, to try to be there for each other, and know that the panels will build on one another. It's amazing how that happens at ACTC conferences, that you feel like this conversation just builds and gets better as we form our community. So encourage you to do that. Any tech type questions? I don't know. Those would be more for Dr. Thomas, but is anybody having any, like, how do I do this questions?
The fact that they're here, I think, means that they have successfully done everything they may have tried to do at this point.
Oh, I have
All
a
right.
clarifying question. Sorry. So when it comes our turn to be on the panel, do you want us leaving the previous panel early to ensure that we're in our panel on like early? Like, do we need to be there early for a briefing, or do we just get there?
No, there's a button that you all must have found on Socio that says join live stream now. It only appears 15 minutes before the session starts. So that's the earliest you can be there. I think it's just fine. There should be someone there 15 minutes before, if not 12 minutes before. We do have a little bit of stuff on the back end to do in between sessions. So, but no, I will make sure we can field questions at the beginning of the session, but it should be pretty straightforward. If you're capable of having this conversation with me now, you really know all you need to know to present your paper.
Thank you.
I just have one question. Is it that there's two panels overlapping at the same time then? Okay.
Yeah, you guys showed up, so we had to schedule concurrent sessions.
Yeah, so make sure you go to the right room then.
There are two separate buttons, rooms, panels on the agenda, so you should be able to see.
Other than the panels that were specifically assigned to present to, do we just have free choice of which panels to?
Yeah, it's all just decide what you're interested in hearing about. And look, the other thing is to, you don't want to go crazy, but it really is okay to begin one and say, oh, really, I should have been at the other one, and leave and go. At real conferences, people do that all the time. You just do it politely, but it's fine.
Will you record both panels?
Yes, and it takes a little bit of work for me to move the recording back onto the Socio site, but that is in fact what happens. So the panel that you missed, you'll have access to probably about, I don't know, sometime later, depending on how busy I am, but you'll have access to Socio for a while. So you'll be able to come back and see the other panels. Thanks, Phil. That was an important thing for me to say.
Thank you.
All right, well, should we break then? I think we're ready to.
I think we should. Okay.
See everyone at the panels.
And I am the person to also talk to about technical stuff. A couple of people who were able to get on Socio found themselves unable to get back onto Socio, and we figured out how to work that around. So as long as you use the same email address, you should be fine, but maybe not. World is full of contingencies. So, but just do email me and I will help you. I'll help you get back on if that becomes an issue. Okay. See you guys in a few minutes. Bye.
Bye.